Okay, so now, for the story, I'm going to give you the Heather Van Sickle story that collides with the NACCE story and then becomes the organization that you see today. So I think the theme for this is very helpful, from mindset to meaningful action. In part, it's a little bit of a theme we stole from Tom Rue with his days, lots of conversation. But in stepping back from the role, it's been a time of reflection for me. And I'll tell you, it all began in the fall of 1998. So in the fall of 1998, I was newly married to my husband, Brett Van Sickle, sitting over there. And he said, I want to start my own business. And so I thought, well, if he's going to start his own business, maybe what I'll do is take a class at the local community college. So I signed up for a class. It was called the Intro to Entrepreneurship, where I met Tom Goodrow, and many of you remember Tom. And he, I sat through some number of sessions. It was really good content, but his handout material was terrible. And my background was graphic design. So I'm looking at his materials and I'm thinking, oh man, he really needs some help. So I go up to him and I say, you know what? I really like your class, but my background is graphic design, and I think I could really help you with your materials. Would you be willing to hire me, and I'll make your stuff look a little better? So he says, maybe I would. So he says, why don't you go talk to Gail Carberry in the Grants and Development Office and tell her that you have an interest in working with me and see what she says. So I said, okay. So I go over and I meet with Gail Carberry, who's now on our board. I don't know if she's in the room or not, but she says to me, okay, well, let me tell you the story of what's going on with Tom Goodrow. So he is trying to do this thing called the Entrepreneurial Institute, lots of programs in entrepreneurship. It's a grant-funded position. There is a little bit of money in the grant, so we could probably bring you on. Why don't you bring me your portfolio of work, and we'll see what we can do. Well, I had to hurry up and make a portfolio of my work. So I went back, hurried up and put some stuff together, and brought it in. She said, looks great. She hired me 18 and a half hours a week to work with Tom Goodrow. So now I was on the flip side. So instead of just being the consumer of entrepreneurship education, I started going into the classrooms with him. We were going into fifth grade classrooms. We were going into community college classrooms. We were using NIFTY program. We were using mother and daughter in teams. It was like old Kaufman program. And so what I was also starting to do is starting to work with Steve Spinelli, who was with Babson College at the time. And we were doing some research around entrepreneurship education and the effectiveness of it. So we started to do pre and post testing, where we would test the kids beforehand, do you think you'd want to start your own business, and all this stuff, and all the way at the end. And what we found, which I thought was really interesting, is while we were opening up their minds to the possibility of entrepreneurship, and they all seemed excited about that, most of the kids by the end didn't want to start their own businesses. So I was like, what are we doing wrong? This seems like not in the right direction. So I noticed that what we were teaching the students seemed to be turning them off. And I also noticed that what we were teaching them didn't match what Brett and I were doing at home with his business. And so there was this big disconnect. And I wasn't sure if I was missing something. I hadn't been classically trained in entrepreneurship education, so that's a distinct possibility. Or could it be possible that education was missing something? So let me tell you the story very quickly of Brett, what happened there. So we were newly married. I snowboarded, he skied. I said, let's go snowboarding. So we go up to New Hampshire, we go snowboarding. Couple runs down, he falls and breaks his wrist. He's a Finnish carpenter. So not only is our snowboard adventure over, so is his work. He can't work for his employer now until it's healed. So of course, we're newly married, we don't really have much cash, so we had to figure out something. So I never realized how handy a graphic design background is, but it actually comes in quite handy. So I made him up some business cards. He went out to some local realtors. He got a couple jobs painting, because he could paint even though he couldn't swing a hammer. And slowly through word of mouth, he got some additional business, and he was able to launch his remodeling company. So what did we not do? We didn't have a business plan. We didn't do projected financials. How would we know who would want us to paint their house or how many people? And that was what I saw as the disconnect. It was very different from what we were teaching in the classroom. And it felt like what we were teaching in the classroom was needed way down the road, maybe, when you wanted to go for financing at a bank or something like that, but not in the beginning. So back at STCC, Springfield Technical Community College, what was happening was that the college was facing what many of you face, which is they had all these cool programming happening in entrepreneurship, but they were running out of money to support it. So the grants funding was starting to go away, and they decided, well, how are we going to raise funds to support our programs? They said, well, what if we package what we're doing here at STCC and sell it like a consulting kind of thing to other community colleges? We could set the price like $5,000, and how are we going to get people to come? So what if we hold an event and we get people to come to Springfield, and at the end we'll pitch them to this idea, and that's how we're going to have this money to support NACCE. So many of you were probably there. That became the first NACCE conference, and the purpose of it really was to showcase STCC, to learn a little bit about what the colleges was doing, but ultimately to support the running of the program. So in 2003, we held the inaugural conference in Springfield, Massachusetts. We had the kickoff event at the Basketball Hall of Fame, and that's where I met many of you. So I'm going to name off a couple of people that have been to nearly every NACCE conference or every NACCE conference. And if I call your name, just stand up, if you wouldn't mind. So we had Pernille Berg, all the way from Denmark. We had Carlene Cassidy, Donna Duffy, Tim Matan, Christine Pigsley, Tim Putnam, Diane Sabato, Ron Thomas, and Chris Valdez. So these are the NACCE groupies. But at that event, we also had two very special guests. So I'm going to show you on the slide right now. The first one was my daughter, Madison, who's sitting over there. She was 3 at the time. And the next one is my son, Jacob. He was a year, and we were trying to keep him occupied with the basketballs at the Basketball Hall of Fame. So you may wonder, on the slides, too, I put this up because many of you are now familiar with the entrepreneurial method that Sarah Sarasvathy has been talking about. The reason I have it up here for my presentation is just to glance over as you're hearing the story, because I think the story of NACCE, in many ways, is the story of the entrepreneurial method. So how did the idea of community colleges buying consulting packages from STCC go over? Well, pretty much like a lead balloon. So the problem was, there was a lot of interest in networking and sharing, but people were not interested. Was that you, Diane, that was laughing so hard? Diane's from STCC in the early days. So what did we do? We didn't really know what to do. I wasn't really part of the leadership team at the time, but we decided, well, we'll just have the next conference near the Kauffman Foundation. That makes sense. So in 2004, we headed to Kansas City. We had the conference right outside the Kauffman Foundation. We toured people through. We were able to get a little funding from Kauffman as well. So then this is where the real fun begins, because in 2004 and 2005, through this strange turn of events, I was the last person standing at NACCE. So what happened was the part-time executive director that they had got ill and resigned. The president who was leading the initiative at the college retired. Tom Goodrow was charged with additional activities, and his day-to-day involvement at NACCE ended. And Kevin Drum and Gail Carberry, who were very active in it, were seeking presidencies in other locations. So I wasn't unprepared for the role because I had done a lot of the background research. I had worked with the initial events. And the good news when you're the last person standing is you get any position that you want. And so, so in July of 2005, I accepted the position of executive director. The bad news, though, is that you're the only person there. So you're the only person to do all the work. So while I was excited, I felt like this was an opportunity to start to change the conversation. Maybe I could start to marry my personal background and what I'd learned with Brett and his business with what was in education. The only problem is we had a growing but young family. My kids were 3 and 5 at the time. And we had a decision to make because our values were that either one of us were going to stay home with the kids. And so Brett, by this time, had a business. He had 2 employees. And I realized when I started that this was going to have to be a full-time endeavor. I was actually still on 18.5 hours a week, but there was no way that that could happen. So after a lot of deliberation and deciding, and I just have to tell you this, I wanted to homeschool Madison, so I was supposed to homeschool Madison. So Brett, we actually switched roles. He homeschooled Madison for kindergarten. He brought down his business. He found alternative employment for his employees, and we were pretty much all in as a family, very committed and hoping that it was going to work out. So the real sign of that, and Diane, you'll remember this, because in our family we had 2 vehicles. We had the minivan for the kids with the car seats, and Brett's box truck, Sickle Custom Carpentry. So he needed the minivan for the kids, so I drove the Van Sickle custom carpentry box truck to the NACCE office every day until it was no longer there, and we just had this little car, and Tom says, what happened to the truck? And I said, we sold it. We're all in. I told you, we're all in on this NACCE thing. So I think that made him a little bit scared. So what did I do when I first got to NACCE? I really needed to understand the financials. So what I did is I went to the business office, and I said, could I get a P&L and a balance sheet on NACCE? And they just looked at me, and they said, well, we can print you the financials. They printed me these reams of paper with all the connected paper with like the dot matrix printed with the little holes on the side, and it was just line items of expenses and some income in there. And I'm thinking, well, how am I supposed to know what the financial condition of the organization is? It really wasn't an organization at the time. It was a program of the college. And so it just had different accounts with the college and just these little line items. So I thought, this is not going to work. So I got all of the financials. I worked with Jody on this. We hand-entered all of the financials from 2002, 3, 4, and the first part of 5 into QuickBooks. So thank you, Intuit, for being the title sponsor this year, and thank you for your product, because it really helped us in the beginning. So I finally had a P&L I could understand, and what I found was that there had been a pretty decent burn rate of cash for NACCE in the first couple of years. I think the college was counting on the fact that they were going to get some funds from the way that their pitch was going to go. So there had been purchases like the office, furniture, there was event planners, database developers, and all of these things, and high hopes for something, really pretty cool to happen. And then it's July of '05. In October is the conference, and not a lot had been done with the conference. So suddenly our all-in on the family situation felt a little dismal. But what I did find is that we were in an incubator at the college. And Deb, we were and still are. We're still a tenant at Springfield Technical Community College in the incubator. Deb King was the incubator director, and I was talking to her. I said, I think I need a salesperson because we've got to get colleges to this conference, and I don't know if I can just call all these colleges. So she said, you know what, there's this woman, Trish Truitt, and she's leaving a sales position right at an incubating company, so maybe she'd come over. So I met with her, hired her. We called from July to October every college in the greater Las Vegas area, which is where we're going to have the conference. And we were able to get 188 individuals to that conference, which was 38 more than had been there before. That's the conference where I met you, Mike. I remember distinctly meeting you because I was way down these bags, and you're like... So post the 2005 conference and half a bottle of Pepto-Bismol later, seriously, because I was very nervous to get on stage, what I found is we had about 150,000. We had to cover our salaries, our overhead, and we needed to figure out a way to pull off the next conference. We also needed to know, though, is this something that colleges really want? Are colleges into this enough to where they would actually pay us membership dues? Because really, to sustain an organization like this, you need support from member organizations. So I found that there was probably a pretty straightforward way that a staff of 2 could find out. So what we did was we created invitational invoices for every college that had ever come to a NACCE conference. And we sent them out. And what we did was we said, the benefit of joining NACCE is you'll get a discount to the next conference, you'll get a quarterly newsletter, and you'll also get a listserv to be connected to members. That was the membership, that was the value proposition. So I made up the invoices, Trish followed up with phone calls, and guess what? Many of you paid us so that we were able to have a membership that we could do year-round, and from that, we drafted up the newsletter, and we put together the listserv so that you could all be connected. We did a couple other things because we needed to do some exchanges, so we called other organizations like the League for Innovation, the Council for Resource Development, USASB, we called CCBA, NBIA, a lot of these organizations that and we said, we have an opportunity where you could exhibit at our conference. We were wondering if we could exhibit at your conference for no charge. We just do a barter exchange. So they said sure, which was great because we didn't actually have exhibits at our conference, but now we did because we had bartered them. And then that allowed us to leverage companies where we say, we already have 5 exhibitors already booked, and we'd love to have you on board. So you think about this whole entrepreneurial method, and in some ways, constraints are good, right? It forces you to figure things out. So I want to talk now just briefly about a point of view. So at the time, in the very early years, NACCE, as in Heather and Trish initially, and then a little bit more people down the road, we didn't have a point of view about the content around the colleges. We were really a convening point. We were treating the colleges as the experts, sharing best practices. But what I was noticing is we had a lot of conversations with colleges. We were talking to them all the time, so we got to know all sorts of levels of individuals and where they're at. And we noticed a frustration both on the educator side and in the leadership side. And I started to realize that we were taking too narrow of a view of entrepreneurship. When we would talk to the college, they would often say, oh yeah, that's over there, like that's in the business department. And I thought, well, that's not really in the business department because people are entrepreneurs everywhere. And I realized that they were treating it like it was just another program. And they also weren't really embracing it as a way of being for themselves. So then it struck me that entrepreneurship is really the same thing. It's the same thing for the students in the classroom, and it's the same thing for the leaders of the college and how they acted. And so I remember having this conversation with Mike Hennessy about this, sharing this epiphany, and I said, I think that we're missing an opportunity because we need to tie all this together for the whole college. The very thing that we're teaching in the classroom to students is what the college needs to know and understand as well. And I was convinced that if we got presidents and administrators to embrace entrepreneurship and act like an entrepreneur, AKA the Entrepreneurial Method, now we have some terminology for this, then entrepreneurship education in the classroom would thrive as well. And I remember you said, so you mean if we get administrators to embrace entrepreneurship as a way of running the college, that somehow it will trickle down to students in the classroom? And I said, that's exactly right, although I felt that it was very difficult to convincingly argue a point that I had just arrived at myself. But it still stuck with me. I just saw it. I saw it so clearly. So I just want to pause out for a minute because I do want to thank Mike and his team. They've been our most loyal, long-standing supporter, Clark McCain and Rosa Berardi, because they have been with us through the whole story. They've seen the good and the bad and the different parts of NACCE. And I really appreciate the support you've offered because even when we didn't quite get it right, you gave us the space to fix it. And so, let me just, hold on. So I think that one of the things is I think that we tried to always do what we said we were going to do. And I think too, one thing that I learned is to think of your money as if it was my own money coming out of my own pocket. And I knew I wouldn't want to waste my money on frivolous, half-baked ideas, so I wanted to make sure that you saw that commitment from us. So I appreciate that. So just one last reflection on entrepreneurship. I have so much to say. I realized it was really hard to pare it down, and I do think I might write some book or something because there's so much learnings over the past years. I don't want it to be lost for the next leader. Just another thing, I don't think entrepreneurship is just a subject unto itself. I don't think it should just be a degree, just like we don't have a jobs degree. I don't think we need an entrepreneurship degree. I think it needs to be embedded in everything that we do and for all students. And as many of you know, I had a quest for bringing this real-world application into academia. And so when we were able to get an entrepreneur in residence that worked with us for a year, thanks to some Coleman support, he introduced me to Sarah Sarasvathy. He said, everything you're talking about sounds like effectuation in this entrepreneurial method. Don't you know Sarah Sarasvathy? And I said, I do not know her. So I looked on her site, and I was amazed because it felt like everything that I'd been talking about that didn't quite know how to put into a framework, she had put in a framework, and she'd backed it up with research. So as many of you know, I called her. She came to last year. Many of you were in her master class. So I know that there's difficulties out there for the colleges, and I know that there's difficulties for entrepreneurs. However, I really do think that when we focus, whatever we focus on really defines those outcomes, because it's like when Henry Ford said, whether you think you can or can't, you are right, and I really believe that. So I think that's the attitude that we have to have, and it's really the first step in the entrepreneurial method. You start with who you are, what you know, and who you know, And then with those initial ingredients, you begin the entrepreneurial process. So what have I learned? I believe that the best way to begin an endeavor is just to start. I think action takes the fear out of beginning, and then something starts to take shape. I think picking up the phone, talking to people, understanding their needs, they understand your needs, something magical just starts to happen, and you feel connected to other people, and you're able to solve problems, and I think a collegiality develops. And that's what we've always tried very hard at NACCE to develop for you. And so I hope that you feel that. I believe, too, that at times we scare people through education, because sometimes I think we make it seem hard, and we make it seem like there's only one way to do something. And I think that the more that we can show that there's lots of ways to accomplish the same thing, the more we release the fear that holds people back. And I see this both in how the college is run and also in how classrooms are taught. And this whole NACCE thing, I just think I saw this through a whole different set of eyes. I didn't come from the academic world. I did what I knew to do, work at something like it's your own business, and if you spend grant or college money like it's yours personally, then you'll make different decisions. So I have a lot more to say, but like I said, time I know doesn't allow for it. And so in closing, I'm just gonna say a few things. So it's been wonderful to be part of the experience of growing NACCE and working with many of you in the process. But I want to thank the board, especially Gail Carberry, for hiring me all those years ago, pre-NACCE. Also, if you don't mind standing, Noah Brown, Jean Giovannini, Angeline Godwin, Kathy Manez, John Hawthorne, Ed Massey, Susan May, Monty Payton, and Chris Valdez. I also want to thank past board members, Kevin Drum, Jem Erdem, Ron Thomas, and Dan Larson, who also had a large part in guiding NACCE along the way. To my faithful and hardworking staff, who I hope is in the room, Megan Ballard, if you don't mind standing, Megan Ballard, Amy Bouvier, Gwyn Griswold, and Karen Michelle Mirko. It's really through your tireless efforts, and I know you guys work very hard, that NACCE continues to grow. Also to Nano Sanye and Jen Parsons, who are making this event look smooth to you all. I'm not sure where they are. They're probably making the event smooth. They're there. I'd also like to thank Trish Truitt, John Jacobs, and Matt Montoya, who are all former staff members instrumental in the growth of NACCE, and my faithful and recently retired editor, Jean Yoakum and Peter Ellis, who gave NACCE a presence through our quarterly journal. Not the one that I did initially, but the one you get now, that's professionally done. I also want to thank a few others, if you don't mind standing. I know Jen Worth isn't here yet, but Jen, Tom Rue, I don't know if John Robinson's here yet. I know John Hughes is not here, but I also want you to let him know that I thank him, and also John Hennessy, for faithfully supporting both me and NACCE at various points throughout the years. I'd also like to thank Sarah Sarasvathy and Sarah Whiffen, because they provided the framework for what I inherently knew the whole time, and I really hope begins to change how community colleges operate. I also want to thank Tommy Goodrow and Andy Schibelli, who believed in me all those years ago when neither I nor NACCE had association experience on our resume. And I also like to express, boy, I don't know why I'm having a hard time with you, Mike. All right, so I'd like to express deep appreciation to Mike Hennessy for showing me what it feels like to have someone believe in you. Maybe I should just end on that one, so I'll just do it over now. And then lastly, if you guys don't mind standing, to my family. Thank you to my husband, Brett, who is the unpaid NACCE advisor. So he was the unpaid NACCE advisor to me all these years. He listened to all my concerns and said that it would all work out somehow. And thank you to Madison and Jacob. You guys can stand. So they have exhibited with me over the years. They've given tips on designing the NACCE website. They've gone with me to many events, and they've had to explain many times to their classmates that their mom does not work for Macy's. So I'm excited for NACCE's future, and I wish the best to the next president and CEO, and I look forward to our paths crossing and of being assistance to the organization in the future in any way that it sees necessary. But now it's time to celebrate and look forward with hope and optimism, because after all, that's what entrepreneurship is all about. Thank you. You're right, Ed. That was tough. So now I'd like to invite President of Indian River State College and NACCE's board chair, Dr. Ed Massey, to the stage to introduce our Entrepreneurial College of the Year. Dr. Massey was appointed as Indian River State College's third president in 1988. He came to the college in '73 as a biology professor and held several administrative posts prior to his appointment as president. Dr. Massey earned his PhD in zoology with an emphasis on marine biochemistry from the University of Southern Mississippi and completed postgrad studies in evolutionary biochemistry from Duke University. Dr. Massey serves on various local, state, and national boards, including Florida's Articulation Coordinating Committee and the current board chair of NACCE. His accolades include the Phi Theta Kappa International Honor Society and Shirley B. Gordon Award of Distinction, and the ACCT Marie Martin Chief Executive Officer Award. That was from last year. And I'm sure that most of you are aware that Indian River has been named as a finalist for the 2015 Aspen Prize for Community College Excellence. And I also want to say he's been spearheading the process as the search for the next CEO. Uh-oh.
Last chance I get to tell you what to do here. Brett, children, y'all can stand behind, Mom and Dad. Wow, you know, I've only been around with NACCE about 4 years, and I have never heard the full history of what has taken place over all those years. That absolutely needs to be written down. It needs to be written down and part of NACCE history. Thank all of you, first of all. 12th annual convention for NACCE. Heather mentioned the first convention that took place, said it was a bottle of Pepto-Bismol. I didn't hear it that way. I heard it was a bottle of martinis and other things. But Heather has given you such a thorough review of NACCE that I'm probably going to adjust my comments going through here a little bit, but I want to tell you a few other things about Heather, and also tell you about some things that we're going to do for Heather. First of all, what an extraordinary job she has done. From the very beginning, you get a real feeling of the challenges that she had to overcome from the very beginning and the creation of NACCE. Let me tell you another thing, a personal point of view. Heather grew up in a family with 6 siblings in a small town in rural Massachusetts, learning the value of entrepreneurship from her father, who owned and operated a mechanic shop that specialized in Volkswagens. We've never had a president and CEO of NACCE that can actually change a transmission out as quickly as Heather is able to do, and probably she's done it, according to that speech today, several times. Her mom took care of the family, and they actually lived in a house that was built in the 1700s and was heated entirely with firewood. So the meaning of hard work was really implanted in Heather and all the siblings from the very beginning. After high school, Heather headed west for volunteer ministry work in Missouri. The entrepreneur within her came out. She landed a job running a livestock farm to make ends meet. Little did she know, and it seems like a lot of these things have happened along the way, and she's adjusted very nicely to all of them, but the owner of the farm had a car accident soon after she arrived, and rather than be a helper on the farm, she ended up running the entire farm until he recovered. When she returned to Massachusetts a few years later, she would fall in love. She would fall in love twice. First of all, to Brett. And Brett, no, it was not another man. And you know that the second time. Brett Ben Sickle, another entrepreneur that you've heard about tonight, they were married in 1998, and you heard about the experiences of having their family and the family being all in everything that they were about. The second love was entrepreneurship. Not sure if any of us really know that we're going to go in that direction, but out of necessity to some degree, and having the vision, having the courage to go in an entrepreneurial route, Heather did that as a student in Springfield Technical College, and she began working with a lot of people there, as she mentioned tonight, to do the groundwork of what became the National Association of Community College Entrepreneurship, or NACCE. After Heather finished her associate, she transferred to Mount Holyoke College to finish her schooling, and all the while NACCE was continuing to bubble up and to emerge as an organization in Springfield. Fate and timing came together, and she explained that to us, and NACCE was ready to go to the next step. And it was time for NACCE to have an executive director in 2005. Heather made that call, as you heard, and she became the executive director of NACCE. Also, you heard in her comments, she started with absolutely nothing. I think it's very important to think through that as she helped us walk through it tonight. She had no members, she had no sponsors, she had a budget that was less than $150,000. So Heather really, over this time, has accomplished amazing and remarkable things in the building and the development of NACCE. Today, NACCE enjoys more than 2,000 members, representing over 300 community colleges, and she oversees a budget that is 10 times larger than what she started with. While this growth as a national organization is impressive, what is even more impressive is how NACCE has been interjected into all of our colleges, and almost the unmeasurable amount of improvement and changes that have taken place in each of our colleges because of the starting, the nurturing, and the building of the NACCE organization. Our faculty are more openly embraced with the importance and taken with the importance of entrepreneurship, not just in business classrooms, but across the curriculum of our entire institutions. More and more administrators understand that this is a way to actually change the culture of a college and enhance the mission of a college, where it becomes really a way of life rather than the old traditional administrative approaches to making a college happen. It's a lot more fun, it's a lot more exciting, it's a lot more empowering, and it changes institutions right before us, thanks to the groundwork that Heather Van Sickle and other people, as she mentioned, has actually done. If we continue to think like entrepreneurs, as we currently are beginning to do, our 300 colleges will become 600 colleges, will become 900 colleges, and expand to colleges across this nation. This is why more than 190 current community college presidents have signed the NACCE President's Pledge, Entrepreneurship Pledge. And this may seem only symbolic, but it's very, very important for the leadership to show the importance of NACCE. Heather Van Sickle deserves great commendation for elevating NACCE to the prosperous state that it is in today. While Heather has chosen to step down from the presidency, she deserves our great respect and support for turning to a most worthy endeavor, and that is her two children sitting on the stage, Jacob and Madison, and her husband, Brett. Heather, you are really the personification of entrepreneurship leadership. Thank you for that. You're the personification of family. Thank you for that. And you're the personification of a great mom. And we thank you for that. On behalf of the NACCE board and its thousands of members, I'm privileged to announce, and we only did this last evening at our board meeting last evening, we approved that the Entrepreneurial College of the Year will forevermore carry Heather Van Sickle's name, and it will always be presented at the annual convention to help us remember the legacy of Heather Van Sickle, even though she's going to be around doing a lot of things probably, but every year her name will be called and remembered when we present the Entrepreneur College of the Year by this organization. Heather, again, thank you for everything you've done.